We'll be dealing with the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive of a conditional. Now, to begin with, let's start first. Let's make a simple recap about what a conditional statement is. So take note, a conditional statement, those are if-then statements. An example is this, and take note, these has two parts. The hypothesis, which is the if part, the conclusion, which is the then part. Okay? Now, if you are having this statement, if a polygon has four sides, then it is a quadrilateral. The hypothesis is a polygon has four sides. And the conclusion is it is a quadrilateral. Same thing with this example. If a number greater than 2 is even, then it is not prime. So meaning, this is the hypothesis, a number greater than 2 is even, and this is our conclusion, it is not prime. It is very important that you know how to distinguish or determine and identify the hypothesis and conclusion, because you will be using the concept in making a converse, an inverse, and a contrapositive. Now, before having the three, let's have this one first. Conditional statements can be true or false. To show a conditional statement is true, you must present an argument to show true in all cases, meaning you should think that the statement is true all the time. If there is one example that can make it false, then it will be automatically becomes false. Isa lang ka-example that will make your conditional false, it's false already. So meaning that is what you call a counterexample. The one example that you can think of that will make the conditional statement false is what you call a counterexample. Now let's have this example. Let's determine whether this is true or false. If a number is odd, then it is divisible by 3. Is this statement true or false?
False.
What makes this false? Just give me one example.
1.
1 is an odd number. 1 is not divisible by 3. That is what you call a counterexample. Another example aside from 1, who can think of an odd number that is not divisible by 3?
5.
The number 17, the number 5, the number 7. So you just name one odd number that is not divisible by 3. Like for example, 5 is odd, but not divisible by 3. That is a counterexample already. Okay? Now, are there any questions regarding the counterexample?
None, sir.
Okay, let's continue. Let's begin with the converse. The converse is simply formed by interchanging the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the key word here is simply to interchange, to exchange the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the hypothesis now becomes the conclusion becomes the hypothesis. So if this is our P implies Q, this is our hypothesis, take note, this is our conclusion. What will happen here, this becomes Q implies P. So the hypothesis becomes the conclusion becomes the hypothesis. So take note of the key word for a converse, interchange. Let's have this example. If x minus y is positive, then x is greater than y. what is the converse of this statement? What is the hypothesis here? The hypothesis is,
X minus Y is positive.
okay, what is the conclusion?
X is
Or
higher.
greater than Y.
To make the converse, you interchange the two. Interchange them. So that becomes, if X is greater than Y, then X minus Y is positive. So our hypothesis now becomes the conclusion. Our conclusion becomes the hypothesis. So that is how you make your converse. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Let's have more examples. Let's have more examples. What about this one? If two angles are adjacent, then they have a common vertex. What is the converse here?
If they have a common vertex, then the two angles are adjacent.
Take note, section Ruby, you should begin your if with a noun, then the then, followed by, yes, go
If
on.
two angles have a common vertex, then they are adjacent.
Okay, that's totally right. If two angles have a common vertex, then they are adjacent. So our clue here is this. If two angles should remain there, then they remains pud na din ha. We will interchange our adjacent and we will interchange it with have a common vertex. So kining duha mo na mag-interchange. Ang two angles and ang they remain na sila din ha. For this example, okay? So our answer will be, if two angles have a common vertex, you have noticed now, conclusion ni nato, it becomes the hypothesis. Then they are adjacent. Adjacent here is the hypothesis. It becomes the conclusion. Is our second example clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's have more examples. If two angles are supplementary, then the sum of their angles is 180 degrees. This time, interchange everything. Yeah, ilisan taning there. Ilisan lang taning there. Sige. You think of a converse now. Sige, go.
If the
If
sum of
two
two angles
angles
is
have
180 degrees, then they are supplementary.
Very good. If the sum of two angles is 180 degrees, then they are supplementary. Or you can have it this way. If two angles have a sum of 180 degrees, then they are supplementary. So you can rephrase it as long as the thought is there. That is totally correct. Is that clear, section Ruby?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Next example. If you are 5 feet tall, then you are also 6 inches tall. What is the converse?
If you are 60 inches
If you are
tall, then
also
you're also 5 feet
Okay. If you are 60 inches tall, then you are also 5 feet tall. Okay? Number 4. What about this? If an angle measures less than 90 degrees, then it is an acute angle.
If an angle
is acute,
if an angle
then it
if
measures
an
less than
angle is
90
an
degrees.
acute,
Okay, so meaning, if an angle will remain, then it will remain. Then we will interchange this one with this one. So I can make use of, if an angle is acute, then it measures less than 90 degrees. Pwede rasad na, if an angle is an acute angle, that's totally fine, then it measures less than 90 degrees. Are there any questions with the converse? Is the converse clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this time, before having the inverse, Let's talk about the negation first. When I say negation, it's simply putting the word not. So if I'm going to have this statement, the negation for this is simply not P. That's not P. So simply when you say negation, you negate the statement. So I'm going to give you this one. What is the negation for this?
Angle RST is not an obtuse angle.
Okay, that's totally right. Angle RST is not an obtuse angle. You just simply put the word not there. That's how you negate statements. What about this one? Intersecting lines are coplanar.
Intersecting lines are
Intersecting
coplanar.
lines are not coplanar.
Correct. Intersecting lines are not coplanar. What about this one?
Acute angle
Acute
measures
angle is
Not
not
measuring less than 90
degrees.
What's your answer again?
Acute angles measures not less than 90 degrees.
Acute angles. How do you negate the word? If it is or our first two examples, we are simply having linking verbs, is and are. How do you negate is and are? You just simply put the word not. Is not, are not. But if you're given like the verb measure, mga regular verbs, how do you negate verbs like this?
Do not.
It's singular man. It's singular. Ano, this is plural. Sorry. Plural man din yung measure. So that's correct. This is now do not measure. So meaning, I'm gonna introduce the word do not here. For the word measure, that's plural, you make use of do, then put the word not, then have the plural form of the verb for measure. So acute angles do not measure less than 90 degrees. So just take note of that. If you're having linking verbs, butangan na nag-is or not, like is not or not. But if you're given like verbs nga measure, lain nga mga verbs like eat, like other verbs, aside na ng mga linking verbs, you make use of do not and does not. Do not for plural, does not for singular. Or let's have this one. What is the negation of this statement?
Alright.
Oh, this is now singular. Take note, measures is singular. So meaning, I'm gonna be using does not. So a right angle does not measure 90 degrees. And then, ang measures nako becomes plural form. Tangtangan ng S anang measures if you're gonna put does not there. Lain man sabihin ko, does not measures. That's totally wrong. It does not measure. Make use of the plural form of the verb all the time. Is that clear, Section Ruby?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, let's now apply this one over inverse. Because when you say inverse, we are simply negating both hypothesis and conclusion. You will now put the word not in the hypothesis, put the word not in the conclusion. So if this is my conditional, if P implies Q, this is now not P implies not Q. Okay? So take note of that. We will put the word not there. Let's have this example. The inverse of a true statement is not necessarily true. Take note of that. For example, let's have this statement. If the angle is 75 degrees, then it is acute. What is the inverse of this conditional?
If the angle is not 75 degrees, then it is not an acute.
Very good. So take note, is mana, there is an is, butang ilag not. Therefore, If the angle is not, take note, is not 75 degrees, then it is not acute. Now, is this statement true or false?
False.
What
False.
makes this false? Give me an angle that is not 75 degrees, but is acute. 60 is not 75, right? 60 is not 75, but 60 is not acute. Is that true or false?
True.
Tawa ha, Section Ruby. I'm gonna give an example. An angle that is not 75 is 60 degrees. Diba 60 degrees is not 75 degrees?
Yes, sir.
Now,
Yes, sir.
if I'm gonna relate this, 60 is not acute. Is that true or false? Is
True,
six-
sir.
False.
it's false because
False.
60 degrees is an acute angle. Maunang this statement, this inverse is false. But our conditional is true because 75 degrees is an acute angle. Maunang gipasabot ani nga, the inverse of a true statement is not necessarily true. Maunang you need to analyze the inverse. Is that clear, Section Ruby?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's have more examples. Let's have more examples. Okay, this one. If two angles are adjacent, then they have a common vertex.
If two angles are not
adjacent, they
then
do not have a common vertex.
Okay, take note. Ang R, just put the word not. Have, introduce, do not, and does not. So meaning, I'm gonna have, if two angles are not adjacent, this is for R. Ya ang sa atong have, I'm gonna use do not. Then they do not have a common vertex. Is example number 2 clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's have more examples. If two angles are supplementary, then the sum of their angles is 180 degrees. Can I have one volunteer, please? Can I have one volunteer?
Rosales, sir.
Rosales, go on.
If two angles are not supplementary, then there's some
Go on. The sum of their
then the
angles.
sum of their angles is not 180
Okay,
degrees.
so here are, here is. So I'm gonna put not diretso. So if two angles are not supplementary, then the sum of their angles is not 180 degrees. So just put the word not there, making it the inverse. Okay, can I have another volunteer for number 3?
Kuya, ma'am. Andrea,
Logo, sir.
Who was that?
Yes, sir.
Sige.
Logo, sir.
Lugo, you'll have number 4, ha? Go.
Sige, sir.
Who was si?
You are not 5 feet tall, then you are not also 60 inches tall.
Correct. That's if you are not 5 feet tall, then you are not also 60 inches tall. Just introduce the word not for R. Introduce the word not for R. Okay, Lugo for number 4.
If an angle does not measure less than 90 degrees, then it is not an acute angle.
Okay, that's totally right. So meaning measures money, I'm gonna use the word does not. Nya ang sa atong is just put the word not. So if an angle does not measure less than 90 degrees, then it is not an acute angle. So that is how you get the inverse. Okay? Next, let's have a contrapositive. So a contrapositive, for a while ha? For a while. Keep na to. Na-hide. Okay, there you go. A contrapositive is formed by negating, then interchanging. So I'm gonna be combining the converse and the inverse. Now, I'm gonna negate it and interchange them. So meaning, I'm gonna negate this, Kenisha. Then, after negating, interchange. So meaning, if I'm gonna have P implies Q, this becomes not Q implies not P. Okay? So the contrapositive for this statement is simply, if an angle is not acute, you have noticed here, then it is not 75 degrees. So, gi-interchange, gi-negate, then gi-interchange nato. Is that clear, section Ruby?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's have
sir.
more examples. Can I have a volunteer? For this, write the
Rosales, sir.
Yes, Rosales, go on.
Pwede unahan sa na akong negating, sir.
Pwede ra, negate sa una, way problema.
Okay, sir. If two angles are not vertical, then they are not congruent.
Okay, so meaning, what's your contrapositive now?
If two angles are not congruent, then they are not vertical.
That's totally right. If two angles are not congruent, so meaning, the conclusion, butangan nignat, niya, ibalhin na ako sa ako ang hypothesis. Same thing with the hypothesis, butangan nagnat, I'm gonna place it in the conclusion. That's totally right. If two angles are not congruent, then they are not vertical angles. Okay? Now, let's have another example. Can I have a volunteer again? Another one?
Okay, yes, sir.
Yes, go on.
If two, nauna na ako ang
Sige, you start with the negating first. Go on. No problem.
If two angles are not adjacent, then they
Do not
if
have.
two angles are not adjacent, then they don't have
Correct. Okay.
a common vertex.
Okay.
Ang contrapositive, sir, kay if two angles are not
Do not. Okay.
if two angles do not have a common vertex, then they are not adjacent.
Okay, that's totally right. Okay? If two angles do not have a common vertex, then they are not adjacent. Oh, look at this one. Akong gi-encirculan. It becomes the conclusion. Nya, gibutangan nagnat. That's why it's here. For this one, introduce do not, and then make it your hypothesis. That's how you make your contrapositive. Another one, number 2. Can I have another volunteer?
Logo, sir.
Yes, go on.
If the sum of two angles is not 180 degrees, then the two angles aren't supplementary.
Okay, that's totally right. If the sum of two angles is not 180 degrees, then the two angles, or they are not supplementary. Okay? So, I'm putting word not here, are not, and then is not, nag-interchange na ang duha. Okay? Next. What about number 3? Can I have another volunteer for number 3?
Rosales, sir.
Okay, Rosales, go on.
If you are not 5 feet tall, then you are not also 60 inches tall.
Okay, that's the negation.
If you are not 60 inches tall, then you are not also 5 feet tall.
That's totally right. If you are not, I'm gonna, ang also lang ha, ato ning ibalhin lang diri sa ubos. If you are not 60 inches tall, then you are not also 5 feet tall. Okay? Let's have another one. Number 4. Any volunteer?
Rosales.
Logo, sir.
Yes. So let's have Lugo. Number 4.
If an angle is not acute, then it does not measure less than 90 degrees.
Okay, that's totally right. If an angle is not an acute angle or is not acute, then it does not measure less than 90 degrees. Are there any questions with the contrapositive?
None, sir.
Okay, very good. Now, let's continue. This time, let's focus on this ha para maklaro ni nato. When I say this is the conditional, take note, this is the conditional. Conditional. So, to make the inverse, kini siya butangan lagnat. Butangan na kugnat. So, not equal is not. When you say converse, interchange. This one and this one interchange mo nang if angle A is acute, then the measure of angle A is 30 degrees. If I'm gonna say contrapositive, negate, then interchange. Or simply tanawang inverse. Ang inverse, gibaliktad. Is this clear? Is our...
Ay not equal to ang symbol, sir.
Yes, ang usapan pag negate ani, how do you negate equal? Ang pag negate ana is not equal. If you're given symbols, you can negate it like symbols pod siya. Okay na siya? Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now
Yes, sir.
let's continue. Biconditional statement. So take note, a biconditional statement is when the conditional statement and converse are both true. Meaning, ang tanan, ang conditional, ang converse, ang inverse, ang contrapositive kay true. So meaning, naa kay biconditional na exist, ana. Now, I'm gonna be using the word if and only if. Yeah, in symbols, this is IFF. That's not wrong spelling. The first time I saw this one in the book, I thought it's wrong spelling, but this is the symbol for if and only if. An angle is called a right angle if and only if it measures 90 degrees. This is an example of a biconditional statement. Okay? Is this clear, section Ruby?
Yes, sir.
Okay, next. Let's write the converse, the inverse, the contrapositive, and a biconditional for this statement. Let's start first with the converse. Can I have a volunteer?
Okay, yes, sir.
Go.
If a triangle ay
Yes,
if a triangle is katong converse na itong mga exchange
correct. If a triangle
if a triangle has two congruent sides, then it is isosceles.
Okay. If a triangle has two congruent sides, then it is isosceles. Okay, correct. That's totally right. Interchange. Let's go to the inverse. Can I have a volunteer again? For the inverse?
Ang inverse, sir, kay katong i-negate, sir, no?
Yes, inverse is negate. Correct.
Kasala, sir.
Go.
If a triangle is not isosceles, then it has
Introduce does not. If a triangle is
if a triangle is not isosceles, then it does not have
correct.
two congruent sides.
It does not have two congruent sides. That's totally right. Kaya ang plural form sa has, have man. Nga naggamit naman tag does not. So, gamitan na to plural form sa has. Mo nang does not have. Okay. What about the contrapositive?
Logo, sir.
Yes, go on, Lugo.
If a triangle does not have two congruent sides, then it is not isosceles.
Okay, correct. If a triangle does not have two congruent sides, then it is not isosceles. Sorry. Isosceles. Okay. Sorry for that. Okay. Let's analyze first. Go to the conditional. If a triangle is isosceles, then it has two congruent sides. Is that true or false? Is this statement true or false? This one.
True.
True.
True, sir.
Because an isosceles triangle has two congruent sides. What about the converse? If a triangle has two congruent sides, then
True, sir.
this is also true. Now, mao man ni akong timanan always section, Ruby. Kung ang converse gani true, the same na siya og meaning sa inverse. So meaning, ang inverse ana niya true pud na siya. Ang conditional ug ang contrapositive, they also have the same truth values.
True, sir.
So meaning, our contrapositive is also true. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what is the biconditional here? Sige, you think of a biconditional.
Sige, nasabay.
Sir, pwede ni may balik tong slide sa
go.
bioconditional.
No problem, go. That's an example of a biconditional.
Rosales, sir.
Oh, go on, Rosales.
If an angle is called isosceles if and only it has two congruent sides.
Okay, let me write it down. Biconditional. A triangle is isosceles. Kini gani siya? Mo na ko isuwat din ni. Nya butangan din ako kining tangtangon ning if, nya kining then ilisan ko nag if and only if. So I'm gonna have a triangle is isosceles if and only if it has two congruent sides. That's how you make your biconditional. So meaning, using the conditional, a triangle, this one, kining then, I'm gonna change that to IFF, isumpay rapod na nako ang it has two congruent sides.